What if the family next door was hiding a century-old secret of blood and madness? Imagine this: a quiet American town where nothing ever seemed out of place. Children played in dusty backyards, neighbors nodded politely at the market, and Sundays were spent at church. But beneath that fragile normalcy lay whispers, dark rumors about a certain house, a certain family, and the things they buried where no one dared to look. True crime investigators often say that monsters don't just come from the woods. They grow inside homes, hidden behind curtains, masked by false smiles. And in this story, the horror wasn't just rumor. It was real. It lived, it breathed, and for generations. It bred in secret. There are cases too disturbing to make it into the evening news, stories police reports only half reveal, and files that vanish from public record. This is one of those cases, a tale of a cousin who knew too much, a backyard filled with secrets, and a bloodline twisted by taboo. Tonight, you'll hear the truth they never wanted you to know. Everyone in that town knew something was wrong, but no one dared to speak. It was the kind of place where silence became tradition, where secrets sank into the soil and lingered in the air like rot. The town sat tucked away in the shadow of the Appalachian hills, a place both beautiful and suffocating. Old houses leaned with age, their paint peeling like old skin, and winding dirt roads stretched into forests that swallowed the light. Outsiders rarely visited, and those who did often didn't stay long. There was something about the quiet, something too heavy, too watchful. Locals whispered about the family who lived on the outskirts, in a house nearly forgotten by time. They were said to be different, strange in ways people didn't want to name out loud. Some claimed to hear inhuman cries echoing from the woods at night. Others remembered faces at the window, staring too long, too still. And then there were the disappearances. A farmhand who never came back from work. A traveling salesman who was last seen walking up that dirt road. An entire season where livestock went missing, their bones discovered in shallow pits. The sheriff kept his distance, but the files still sat in his office drawer. Unsolved cases, names without closure, and notes scribbled with frustration. Everyone in town suspected the same thing. But suspicion was dangerous here. You didn't accuse that family. You didn't speak their name. Instead, you kept your head down and prayed whatever lived out there in the woods never turned its eyes on you. But silence can't bury everything. Eventually, secrets claw their way back to the surface. When the sheriff stumbled upon something unusual on a cold October morning, it was no longer possible to pretend nothing was wrong. He brushed away dirt with trembling hands, revealing what lay hidden in the backyard. A discovery that would confirm the town's darkest suspicions. And this was only the beginning. One night, the silence broke. And it started with a scream. The town was used to strange noises. Animals crying out in the woods, the groan of shifting trees in the wind. But this was different. The sound cut through the night like a blade, high-pitched and desperate, echoing off the hills until even the dogs went quiet. A few neighbors swore it came from the old house at the edge of town. Others said it drifted from somewhere deeper, near the creek where children were warned never to play. But by the time the sheriff arrived, there was nothing left except stillness and the faint rustle of leaves. The next morning, a local teenager named Ruthie Sanders was reported missing. Her bicycle was found near the road leading to the family's property, the tires still muddy as if it had been dragged off the path. Rumors spread fast, fanned by fear. Was Ruthie another victim of the whispers? The newspaper ran a brief story. Teen missing in Appalachian hills. Police investigating. But locals already knew how that story would end. Witnesses came forward hesitantly. One old farmer admitted he saw lights flickering in the woods the night Ruthie vanished. Too many lanterns, moving in strange patterns. Another said he heard low voices chanting, though he swore he couldn't recognize the language. Then there were the tracks. A set of bare footprints found near the edge of the creek, too large to be a child's, too twisted to be an ordinary man's. The sheriff ordered a search, but the woods seemed to swallow evidence whole. Dogs lost the scent. Deputies found only broken branches and the lingering smell of smoke. Some claimed to see shapes watching from between the trees, figures hunched, unmoving, with eyes that caught the light, like animals. By the end of the week, hope for Ruthie was gone. But as officers widened their search, they stumbled upon something chilling. An old cellar deuce, hidden beneath vines and dirt, not far from the family's land. The lock was broken, as if someone, or something, had forced its way inside. And when they opened it, they realized it wasn't the first time. So who lived on the edge of town? The ones no one dared to visit. The family had no clear last name. Some called them the Hollow People. Others whispered a word that carried both disgust and fear. Inbreds. Generations had passed since they first settled in those woods, marrying only among themselves, producing children who rarely went to school and never spoke to outsiders. No one remembered when they first arrived, only that they had always been there, like the hills themselves. Their house sat in ruins, sagging under its own weight, shutters broken, and windows covered with dirty blankets instead of glass. The yard was a graveyard of rusted cars, animal bones, and twisted metal, as if time itself had decayed faster on that land. People said if you stood too long outside, you'd feel eyes on you, watching from cracks in the wood, blinking from shadows. The children were the most unsettling. Thin, pale, with uneven faces that looked both too old and too young. Some had sunken eyes that never seemed to close. Others bore swollen, misshapen features, as if their bones had grown wrong inside their skin. They rarely spoke, only stared, sometimes giggled in strange, breathless bursts. And when they did make sounds, it wasn't language. It was something else. Neighbors whispered of strange rituals, fires burning at night, shapes circling in the yard, and voices carrying through the trees in tones not meant for human throats. One hunter swore he found a half-eaten deer carcass near their property, its remains gnawed as though by both human and animal. Another told of hearing a baby cry in the woods, though no infant had been born in town for months. Still, no one ever dared step closer. Fear kept the family untouchable, their name unspoken in polite company. Yet curiosity has a way of gnawing at silence. And when Ruthie's disappearance left the town desperate for answers, a deputy made a reckless decision. He would step across the line everyone else avoided. He would go inside. What he found waiting for him in that rotting house would change everything. But what really happened inside that rotting house? The deputy stepped through the door with only a lantern in hand, its light flickering against warped wood and sagging beams. The air inside was heavy, rancid with the smell of mildew and something sharper, like iron, like blood. Every creak of the floor seemed to echo too loudly, as if the house itself was listening. The first room was cluttered with broken furniture, piles of dirty clothes, and stacks of newspapers yellowed with age. Photographs, too, were scattered across the floor, faces blurred, scratched out, or crudely marked with X's. Some showed children with crooked smiles. Others were too disturbing to fully comprehend. He found one that made his breath catch. A girl who looked eerily like Ruthie, though the photograph was decades old. Deeper inside, the deputy discovered a kitchen where jars lined the shelves, some filled with murky liquid, others with unrecognizable chunks floating inside. The sink was rusted, clogged with hair, and the walls were scratched with carvings, circles, crosses, and symbols that didn't match any church he knew. He swore he heard whispers coming from the walls themselves, but when he turned, nothing moved. The upstairs was worse. Mattresses without sheets, stained and sunken, sat directly on the floor. The windows were nailed shut, letting in no light. In one corner, dolls had been arranged in a circle, their heads turned inward, their glass eyes missing. A stench seeped from beneath the boards, thick and suffocating, and with it came a buzzing of flies. Driven by dread, the deputy pried up a loose plank. The lantern's glow revealed something hidden beneath the floorboards. Scraps of clothing torn and buried, locks of hair tied with ribbon, and bones. Small, unmistakably human bones. His breath froze in his throat. This was no longer a rumor. This was proof. And as the house seemed to breathe around him, the deputy realized he wasn't alone. Somewhere deeper inside, a floorboard groaned. The rumors were horrifying, but the truth was worse. The deputy's discovery beneath the floorboards forced the sheriff to bring in more men, though most entered the property with shaking hands. They expected filth, maybe even evidence of murder, but what they found told of something far older, something generations in the making. Behind the house, they uncovered shallow graves. Some held animals, but others held skeletons far too small, their bones tangled together as though carelessly discarded. Each grave seemed more recent than the last, as if the cycle had never ended. When investigators dug deeper, they unearthed skulls with deformities, elongated jaws, sunken sockets, and twisted spines, signs of generations of inbreeding that had left their mark in the most grotesque ways. The family's history came to light through fragments, torn birth records, crumbling diaries, and newspaper clippings hidden inside a rusted tin box. The documents told of cousins marrying cousins, uncles taking nieces as wives, and children born not of love, but of necessity to keep the blood pure. The writings hinted at rituals, offerings buried in the earth, prayers scrawled in symbols older than the town itself. What chilled the sheriff most was the connection to Ruthie's disappearance. Among the items recovered from the cellar was a ribbon, still bright despite the dirt, identical to the one Ruthie had been wearing the night she vanished. That was when the whispers about feeding the bloodline could no longer be dismissed as ghost stories. And yet, the most terrifying discovery wasn't in the graves or the diaries. It was in the basement, hidden behind a false wall. When deputies forced it open, they found a narrow chamber where something, still lived. Pale skin clung to bone, eyes bulged unnaturally wide, and its body shook with violent spasms as it hissed in the lantern light. It was alive, but barely human. The men staggered back, some swearing under their breath, others refusing to look. For in that moment, it was clear. The bloodline hadn't ended. And the worst part? One of them was still out there, free. They should have left. But by then, it was too late. The deputies thought they had seen the worst, but the house had more to reveal. As they tried to drag the pale, spasming figure out of the basement, a noise erupted from deeper in the woods. A guttural howl, low and animal, yet disturbingly human. The lanterns flickered, and every man froze. Then came the sound of movement, branches snapping, leaves thrashing, as if dozens of feet were rushing toward the property. The sheriff barked orders, but panic spread like wildfire. One deputy fled through the front door, only to vanish into the tree line with a strangled cry. Another swore he saw glowing eyes watching from the brush, pairs of them moving closer. The men realized with horror that the figure in the basement wasn't alone. It was never alone. The air grew thick with the stench of rot as shapes emerged from the woods. Twisted silhouettes limped and crawled, some too bent to stand upright, others unnaturally tall and thin. Their uneven faces glistened in the moonlight, their mouths stretched in grotesque, tooth-filled grins. The deputies fired their guns, the shots deafening in the night, but the figures didn't scatter. They came closer. One man screamed as something yanked him into the dark. Another stumbled over the graves, only to feel cold hands clutching at his ankles from below. The sheriff shouted for retreat, and the remaining men bolted toward the road, stumbling through mud and fog, their breath ragged, their boots slipping. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, footsteps pounding, wheezing breaths, a chorus of inhuman laughter. The deputy who first entered the house nearly didn't make it out. As he turned for one last glance, he swore he saw children watching from the windows, silent, smiling, their heads tilting in eerie unison. They thought they escaped when the road finally opened before them. But as the men caught their breath, one deputy noticed something horrifying. The pale figure they had dragged from the basement was gone. The chains lay broken in the dirt, blood trailing into the woods, and the nightmare was only beginning. So what became of the family, and those who survived? Officially, the sheriff's report claimed that the deputies stumbled onto a den of squatters, violent, unstable, and likely responsible for Ruthie's disappearance. But the language was vague, almost deliberately blurred. No mention of the shallow graves, no photographs of the deformed bones, and certainly no record of the pale figure that slipped away into the woods. Within weeks, the files were stamped closed. The town was told to move on, but survivors of that night whispered a different story. Some deputies resigned and left the county altogether, never speaking of what they saw. Others drank themselves into silence, their eyes hollow when asked about that night. The sheriff himself avoided the subject until his death, though one deputy swore he heard the old man mutter in his sleep, "It's not over. They're still out there." As for the family, their house was burned down by unknown vandals just months later. Yet locals swore they still saw movement in the hills, strange shadows crossing the ridgelines, voices chanting at dusk, and fires burning deep in the forest. Hunters sometimes reported finding bones in places no animals should be buried. And once in a while, late at night, a scream would echo through the valley. Ruthie was never found. Her case remains a cold file gathering dust, a name on a list of the missing. But townsfolk believe she became part of the bloodline's ritual, one more victim to keep their cursed family alive. Which leaves the final question. What if one of them walks among us now? What if the pale figure that escaped the basement blended into the world outside, hidden in plain sight? A cousin who knew too much, carrying the blood of generations. The truth is, the cover-up left too many gaps, too many secrets buried in shallow earth. And if you ever find yourself wandering those woods, you might hear it. The low hum of voices, the crunch of footsteps following just behind you, the faint cry of someone who sounds lost. Don't go looking. Some secrets are meant to stay buried.